Hear this from the book of Acts. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. Awe came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all, as any who had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all people. And day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This early Christian community lived it. The reality that they needed one another. That together they were stronger than they were alone. This early Christian community, these followers of Jesus, engage in the same marks of identity that we do today as a church. We have teaching and fellowship and prayer, breaking bread, worship, sharing our resources, our time, our talents, our treasures. In so doing, it's realizing this is the foundation of who we are. That we are part of a greater story. That we participate with God in the healing of ourselves and of this world. Possibly it was their relationship, their encounters, their experiences with Jesus, right? Because they had followed Him. They had lived with Him. They had seen Jesus attend to and care for bodies. Bodies that were ill. Bodies that were sick. Bodies that were broken and in need of attention and healing. Bodies that lived in a broken economic system that had many people in need, some might call it poor, with the rich becoming more wealthy. And yet Jesus saw these bodies and attended to them to help bring about their healing. Because to be sick in those days meant that someone was ostracized from a community if they were seen as unclean. And yet Jesus saw these bodies and need to be brought back into life-giving community. So these early followers of Jesus, who were also faithful Jews, understood that the welfare of others, economically and spiritually, was just as important as their own. They understood this care as part of the heart of biblical ethics. So they were co-creating together. Community and churches and relationships were not just a few thrived, but all of them thrived. Because there was real needs there. They were hungry. They were being taxed at exorbitant amounts. Many of them had lost their land, and they needed one another to survive. It was rather countercultural, this praxis of the poor, this praxis of giving to those in need, because they then had the power to eliminate poverty in their midst. Because they were intentionally co-creating a supportive environment, realizing their interdependence through relationships and generosity. In their time of excluding the other and building walls to keep people out, they envisioned a different reality, a new economic transformation that was grounded in spiritual transformation. This Jerusalem community devoted themselves. They understood that it was all grounded. The building block foundation was in their spiritual formation. They knew the necessity of prayer and worship and theological reflection because what they believed mattered and how they lived their lives. They were following this God who was breaking down barriers, economic, property, and wanting to include all. So they were filled with awe. I appreciated the wisdom of our kids today, talking about their smiles and their joy and their dancing. Doesn't that feel a lot like awe? They witnessed the great things that God was doing through their community. They believed that abundant life was possible for everyone and that God was moving in their lives, giving them the power to love and to heal and to welcome. And then this Jerusalem community shared with one another. And this is where the biblical scholars get really nervous. And they say, now they really didn't sell everything, did they? Because that might be called, you get to decide what economic system you want to call that. They didn't really distribute everything equally, did they? I think that's missing the point. What they saw in this community was that some folks had a lot and some didn't have as much, but they had this mental space and this heart space that they knew that they were connected, and their own thriving was tied up in the thriving of their neighbor. Remember how we talked about Ubuntu a while back? The African wisdom that my humanity is tied to your humanity, that I am because you are and you are because I am. This early Christian community was living out what it meant to worship God with their entire being and to love their neighbor as themselves. They had a moral obligation to care for their neighbor just as they cared for their own family. And I know how radical this sounds because each week you all are participating in it. Each week. When that money comes out of your checking account, maybe you do direct deposit for your tithes, your gifts here. When you brought your gift forward, that's a radical act. Radical in a positive, good way, in a life-giving way, because we are saying we are part of that community, and when we see a need, we're going to help with that so that our neighbors can thrive. On behalf of the staff, I appreciate this church's commitment to bridge in the gap. The staff and I are your neighbors. You all thrive, we thrive. We thrive, you thrive. We're all connected one with another. And I appreciate y'all living that out here, that we're living it together. The well-being of my family is what I would hope for you and your family, yes? That it's about all of us thriving together. And then they had these glad and generous hearts. That's something that we do pretty well here. Glad and generous hearts. In a moment we're going to come forward and share a meal together. Because Jesus said, whenever y'all meet, do this in remembrance of me. It reminds us of our interdependency, that we depend on the efforts of others. That somewhere, and if I knew my geography a little bit better, where do our grapes come from? California? Where? Do they come from there too? Yes. So we can imagine some folks who may be documented or they may not be. But they've come to make a better living for themselves. Or it could just be some, who knows what kind of workers picking our grapes, right? And then they went into some trucks. Did someone take them to smash them down? That they went to a plant that did that, and then there were other people. Y'all with me on how connected we are? Just to have our simple grape juice. That they went into trucks. And then those trucks went on the road that our taxes help pay for so that we can all be safe one to another. And then they went to a store and there was someone who took those grape juice bottles off of the truck and stocked them onto the shelf. And then if our wonderful diaconate members went to the store and had a nice conversation with the person at the cashier, yes, because we did a money exchange and no one was on a cell phone and we smiled at one another. Because that was a moment of humanity, wasn't it? And then they drove or biked or walked here again to bring this simple juice. The same thing happened with the bread, that we are connected one with another. And so, God, we ask that you would help us remember that our humanity is connected, that we are tied one to another, and that we, through our generosity, become people of justice and love. May it be so. Amen.